Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this important conversation. This is a truly amazing moment in history, and I'm honored to be here today to welcome you to this exciting rally, Win with Williamson. I'm Cassie Underwood, head of Women of Wellness for Marianne. I'm filling in for Catherine Woodward Thomas today, who is a little under the weather, but she sends her love. Some people say the race really starts the day after Thanksgiving, so this is a very meaningful time for us all to come together. Marianne Williamson's vision for America is the most invigorating and exciting vision I have heard. She deeply understands the founding principles of America, and her vision renews my hope for the whole world. I'm so proud to be part of this campaign. Everywhere she goes, she is getting standing ovations because once you hear Marianne Williamson, you can't unhear her. It's a joy to have hope for the future, and this is an incredible historic opportunity. We will be together today for 75 minutes. We will be opening the chat to your questions, and I just ask that you please keep them brief so that we get to everyone. And please keep them precise and to the point. It makes it easier for me to ask them to Marianne. We will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. Before we introduce Marianne, I want to introduce you to her campaign manager, Carlos Cardona.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Carlos Cardona. I'm the campaign manager for Marianne Williamson 2024. I'm in Laconia, New Hampshire. And of course, New Hampshire this year will play a very important role in the election. And I just have to say, everywhere we go, the excitement is there, the crowds are there. We're starting to really build an incredible momentum in this campaign, and you can feel the energy everywhere we go. Marianne was just in Michigan. And of course, this weekend, we're going back to Nevada, and we'll continue from there to state to continue to bring the case to the American public and make the case that Marianne Williamson should be the next president of the United States. And I just want to leave it with this. You know, right now, we're qualified in so many states: New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, California, and Texas. And we have so many more states to qualify in. So I thank you for the support you've given us in the past and the support that you'll continue to give us in the future. It's an honor and a privilege myself to be in this campaign and be working with such an incredible, talented group of individuals. And it's I'm incredibly proud to be here with you all co-hosting this incredible rally online to show that we have support and momentum. And of course, poll after poll continue to make the case that not only we're going up, but that Marianne should be the next president of the United States. And of course, I'm just so proud of the momentum we have. And we have such an incredible candidate, incredible policies. And I hope that you'll continue to support us as we continue to move forward. The next 2 months are going to be incredible, are going to be high energy, and of course, full of great events that we're going to be putting up. So please keep an eye on those. And it's without further ado that it's a pleasure and an honor to be introducing to you all the next president of the United States of America, Marianne Williamson.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Cassie. Thank you, all of the team who put this together. Thank you, Catherine Woodward Thomas, and all of the people who sent out notices to your people, your audiences, so that I could have this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. You know, this is the day after Thanksgiving, and traditionally, people say that that's really when the campaign begins. For those of us who are particularly politically attuned, political junkies of sorts, you know, we're thinking about this stuff all the time. But the basic American temperament is not one in which people want to think about politics all the time. And yet when it comes campaign season, people are like, oh, okay, oh, wow, I have to start thinking about this. There's a campaign coming up. And I think particularly right now, people have a lot of concern about the campaign that is upon us, and for very good reason. As Carlos said, I go around the country, and I spend a lot of time in New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada and Michigan and California and all kinds of places, speaking the truth of my heart as it relates to this campaign. But we wanted to do this today because some of you haven't had a chance to hear sort of my whole, stump speech. And I'll tell you why this matters in my mind. A political campaign is a long job interview. You're thinking about who you're going to hire for the job. And the job is arguably the most powerful position in the world. And it's a role and a person who holds tremendous levers of power. And so I respect, and I know that you do too, or you wouldn't be here, that you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your country to think long and hard about who you vote for. Now, I want to point out, we're talking about a primary, so none of this spoiler stuff, because it's a primary. And my opponents are Joe Biden, President of the United States, and also a man named Dean Phillips. And then Cornel West and Jill Stein and Bobby Kennedy are running either Green Party or independent. So what we're talking about here is the schedule of Democratic primaries, deciding who will be the Democratic nominee to take on, presumably, Donald Trump. Who knows? It's not a done deal yet, or any other Republican candidate in November of 2024. As a candidate for this job, I want to tell you today who I am, and I want to tell you what I would do with this power if you put it in my hands. Some of you already know my work, and some of you already know a lot of what we're talking about doing, you know, what I'm already standing for. And if you are already a supporter, then I'm asking you to please, my hope is that you will be interested in taking this to the next step. If you are not already a supporter, I hope that this will give you some serious thinking to do about my candidacy and whether it might be something that you want to support as we move forward. I have had a 40-plus career working very up close and personal with people whose lives were in trouble. And my career began back in the 1980s. And it began during the time, very close to the time of the AIDS crisis. And during the AIDS crisis, because it was, you know, sometimes people have asked, well, how is the AIDS crisis different than COVID? The difference is that COVID was very difficult to get, but if you got it, you would probably survive. AIDS was different. It was very difficult to get, but if you got it, you would probably not survive. And so to say that you were really there during the AIDS crisis means that you really understood a life in crisis and real life and death issues. And out of that period of time, I began to have more and more experience working with people whose lives were in crisis. What does it take to endure a crisis, and what does it take to transform it? And so I feel very privileged that I had the opportunity to be with people during very difficult times in their lives. But I'm a human being. I understand, you know, we all go through things. And I feel that decades of experience led me to understand the things you have to do. Now, when I moved to Michigan back in the late 1990s, I began to see something. I began to see, just as I had before, people whose lives were in crisis. People whose lives were in crisis that I had known before had to do with the test results came back and it was cancer. You find out your child is addicted to crystal meth or heroin or something. You find out your spouse is leaving and you didn't even know there was a trouble. You find out that bankruptcy is your only option, whatever it was. But when my career began, all during those years, when I would be working with people whose lives were in crisis, there was a general feeling that life was okay and that crises happen, things happen in people's lives. But the crisis was the exception and not the rule. When I moved to Detroit, Michigan, and I was the interim non-denominational minister at a spiritual center there, a non-denominational church spiritual center there, I began to meet many people who, once again, their lives were in crisis. But I saw something that stunned me when I really took it in. They were not lives that were in crisis because of things that just, you know, sometimes it happens and, you know, it just happens. Their lives were in crisis because of bad public policy. Their lives were in crisis because they didn't have health care. Their lives were in crisis because they couldn't live on just one job. Their lives were in crisis because it was really an issue whether or not they could feed their children. Their lives were in crisis because they were afraid to send their kids to school. And I began to, the more I traveled the country, see that America itself had changed. that crises had become the new normal. You know, there's actually a book out there called Perma Crisis, because the whole world is experiencing it now, one crisis after another. And so what I began to realize around the year 2000 was people's crises seemed to be, among millions and millions of people, as I viewed it, the rule and not the exception. And that's, like I said, when I realized that no amount of spiritual counseling, no amount of private charity, no amount of personal transformational efforts can compensate for what is basically an unjust society in which so many people are left out of the flow of possibility that I had grown up with, as to make it almost inevitable that they would see crises that most of us would think were unacceptable in the richest country in the world. And that's when I began to think, we need to transform the way politics is done in this country, because I've known a lot of politicians, some nice people. None of this is about not nice people versus nice people. That's not what we're talking about here. But I began to realize that Washington itself and how it operates, and politics and how it operates, had changed in this country. And I'm not trying to whitewash or romanticize the America that I grew up in, but things were different. Things were different in some ways that I think we should remember. Back in the 1970s, the average American worker had decent benefits. Back in the 1970s, the average American worker could afford a house. And the average American worker could afford a car. And the average American worker could afford a yearly vacation. And the average American couple could afford to send their kids to college. Tax policies, other policies in our society, were set up in such a way as to make the flow of abundance more universal than not. It was not a lie to say that for the majority of people, if they work hard, they can have a shot at what we think of as the American dream. But over the last 50 years, something has happened. It started with something called trickle-down economics. It was the idea that if we just moved all the money as much as possible into the hands of the stockholder class, then those stockholders would become job creators. And so they would create jobs, and then all this money would trickle down and lift all boats. And how was that money transferred into the hands of the stockholder class? Well, you deregulate, you squash unions, and you give big tax cuts to the very, very richest people. You allow CEOs to be paid in stock options, which inherently means that there's a conflict for the CEO, him or herself, between their own financial good and the care of workers. And you have companies able to do these stock buybacks. In other words, we created a matrix of corporate power that became powerful within our government and within our society in ways that they had never been before. And as we created this situation where stockholders got most of the money, we were told that that would be good because they would be job creators. But their business model was never job creation. The business model was job elimination and the exploitation of workers. And the money for stockholders was placed above all the other stakeholders. Who are the other stakeholders? The workers in a business are a stakeholder. The community is a stakeholder. The environment is a stakeholder. Safety, children, these are all stakeholders. But what happened was we moved money and opportunity into the hands of a very few people to the extent of $50 trillion that was transferred from the bottom 90% of Americans. So I already described to you what it was like in the 70s. Also in the 70s, there were 300,000 people imprisoned in the United States. And now let's talk about how it is today. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. 68,000 Americans die every year from lack of health care. 85 million Americans are uninsured or uninsured. Half of our seniors live on less than $25,000 a year. 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States. 1.3 million ration their insulin. We have a corporate matrix of insurance companies, which is the only reason we don't have universal health care. Every other advanced democracy has it. But the institutionalized greed of insurance companies ensures that we don't. Every other advanced democracy has tuition-free college and tech school. The only reason people in this country are rationing their insulin is because of the institutionalized greed of pharmaceutical companies. The only reason we have carcinogens in our food is because of the institutionalized greed of big food companies. The only reason we have chemicals that we know harm children's brains in pesticides is because of the institutional greed of chemical companies. The only reason we have children praying every morning that they won't get shot at school is because of the institutionalized greed of gun manufacturers. The only reason, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they fall in line and ramp up rather than ramp down fossil fuel extraction when we know the risk that this is putting to the future of the planet itself is because of the institutionalized greed of the big oil companies. And the only reason we have fought wars in our lifetime that turned out in retrospect to have been little more than piggy bank activity for defense contractors and the proverbial military industrial complex is because of the institutionalized greed of the defense industry. This is what it has come to. And that matrix of corporate power now, particularly since the Citizens United decision, which gives unlimited influence, permission for unlimited financial influence on the part of those corporations on Washington, that has turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. It's a system at this point of economic tyranny, because in issue after issue, public policy after public policy, our leaders are doing more when it comes, bottom line, in the laws that are made and the laws that are repealed, they do more to serve the short-term profit maximization of their donors than to serve the goal of the safety and the health and the well-being, much less the expressed will of their own constituencies. Franklin Roosevelt said, a necessitous man is not a free man. What does it mean to be necessitous? It means you're poor, it means you're hungry. We have the highest rate of poverty of any advanced democracy. And that means, of course, the highest rate of child poverty. There is no reason in the world why in the richest country in the world, there should be a hungry child. And yet there are millions of them in the United States. And children at this point are kind of a collateral damage of this kind of unjust economic system, because they're not old enough to vote, so there's no constituency there, and they're not old enough to work, so there's no financial, so they have no economic leverage. And if you don't have financial leverage in Washington, man, you're not in the game. And that's why candidacies like mine have such a difficult time. The system is rigged, everyone, so that unless, more and more, we've created a society where only those with access to capital have an easy time getting healthcare, adequate healthcare, access to capital, a shrinking group that has the real access to educational opportunities and so forth. At this point, 70% of Americans say that they live with constant economic stress. 62% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 1/3 of Americans live on less than $15 an hour, and half of those cannot find a place to live. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in my 20s and have tens of thousands of dollars worth of college loan debt. Debt is crippling. When I was growing up, the American dream was to have that house with a picket fence. For millions and millions of Americans now, the American dream is to, please, dear God, may I get out of debt before I die. This is unsustainable. Even forget that it's immoral, that it's unnecessary. It's unsustainable. And all the anxiety and all the tension that lies beneath the surface of things is already beginning to blow. And this is time for us to grab hold of history, because it's going to blow in one direction or the other. It's either going to blow in the direction of greater democracy and justice, or it's going to blow in the direction of chaos and violence, and God help us, fascism. So there are times to just let events occur, and there are times to take hold of history. And this is a time when you and I need to take hold of history. That's what the abolitionists did. That's what the women's suffragists did. That's what the original labor organizers did. That's what the civil rights workers did. When this country had swerved so far off the course of democracy and liberty for all, they answered, they responded, they rose to the challenge. They responded to slavery with abolition. They responded to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement. They responded to the Gilded Age with the labor movement, the establishment of the labor movement. They responded to segregation, the institutionalized suppression of Black people in the American South with the civil rights movement, and they all prevailed. And I'm running for president because it's our turn now. Now, some people have said to me, oh, Marianne, how can you do this? Don't you understand the fascists are at the door? I want to make this very clear. I'm running for president because the fascists are at the door. And I agree with Franklin Roosevelt, who said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivered on its promises. And that's what I want to do. I want to help inspire a new chapter of American history in which we return to a basic pillar of American liberty, and that is advocacy for the average American and the possibilities in the life, the possibilities to thrive for the average American. When Abraham Lincoln said that the men who died at Gettysburg had died so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth, I'm running and I'm asking for your support because it's perishing now. We are not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. If our government was functioning of the people, by the people, for the people, we would have universal health care, like in every other advanced democracy. And we would have tuition-free college. And we would have paid family leave. And we would have subsidized childcare. And we would have guaranteed sick pay. And we would have a guaranteed living wage. Those are the promises of democracy that are afforded to the citizens of other democracies. And ours are not. And it is now baked into the cake that the system remains as it is. It is the status quo that it is not afforded to the average citizen of the United States, the promises which should be afforded to all of us. And I realized, and if you think about it, I think you'll realize too, that status quo is not going to disrupt itself. And that status quo is filled with a political class, which is never what I found it had in mind. And it's a kind of political media industrial complex. And they feel entitled to tell you what your options are, even to the point of erasing candidates, peripheralizing candidates, smearing candidates that they think, oh, no, we don't want them. They aren't people we should consider qualified, because to them, qualified means qualified to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. My qualification is not to know how to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. My qualification is experience that has led me to be able to disrupt it, to name what needs to be named, to say what needs to be said, to recognize an abusive relationship. And do you not have an abusive relationship with big food companies who have put carcinogens in your food? Look at an article, any article about a ketchup bottle here versus a ketchup bottle in Canada. Look how many foods they do not, carcinogens in food that they do not allow in other countries. But because it'll make the shelf life longer, so big food companies would make more money, it's in your food. What kind of abusive relationship do we have with a system which has allowed that 46% of the urban water wells in this country are filled with those PFAS, forever chemicals that don't ever break down in your body? What kind of abusive relationship do we have with a government that allows that has allowed the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and all of the various agencies that were set up to protect us and to advocate for us against any overreach by capital or any other forces? The government is so bought and sold, they enable those forces. Yes, that is an abusive relationship. And the first thing we need to do is to name that and recognize it. Like I said, this isn't good people versus bad people, but it is a very unjust system. Now, some people would say, Marianne, you've had no experience in Washington. You're not a political car mechanic. The problem isn't that we lack political car mechanics. There are political car mechanics all over Washington. You hire them. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. I don't know what the system as it now exists is so self-congratulatory about, oh, it has to be one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, we're 6 inches from the cliff. Our democracy is 6 inches from the cliff. Too many of our bodies are 6 inches from the cliff. Our environment is 6 inches from the cliff. And so what we need to do now is to turn this thing around. We are on our way to the iceberg. That iceberg could be a nuclear disaster, it could be a weather catastrophe, it could be AI. There are so many ways. That global catastrophe, we are so close in too many areas to catastrophes we could not absorb. And one major political party is headed right there. And the other major political party, when it is headed by a corporatist element, is just moving there more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. I want to turn that ship around. And I believe that my experience, I've had experience too, I'm plenty experienced. I'm experienced at the things that need to happen now because I want to do for this country what I feel I have learned how to do in millions of people's lives. Because the same psychological principles that prevail within an individual prevail within a country. All that a country is a group of people. And what does that mean? I want to help America look in the mirror. I want to help America do what we have to do to endure crises and transform crises. Look in the mirror at ourselves. Where am I and where am I not who I say I am? Where do I and do I not stand on the principles on which I purport to stand? Where do I have to make some changes? Where do I have to make some amends? Where do I have to be willing to go forward, having cleaned up the past? And so I have several agenda items. I want to tell you about them. Because if you elect me president, I'm going to get to work on these things. You won't be surprised at what I do, because I'm telling you right now what I will do if you give me that job. First of all, Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote an economic bill of rights, which I have brought up to date. Universal health care. Like I said, cancellation of the college loan debt, tuition-free college and tech school, universal subsidized childcare, paid family leave, guaranteed housing, guaranteed sick pay, and a guaranteed living wage. All of this is written on Marianne2024.com. I hope that you will go to the website, check out my issues page. We have so many issues there, very filled out, very well articulated policy positions. Secondly, we need a Department of Peace. You know, a lot of us have become aware over the last few years of a real change in the way we see sickness and health. Health is not the absence of sickness. Sickness is the absence of health. So to live a healthy life, do you need universal health care, Medicare for all types of situations? Absolutely. But we need to go further. And my whole health plan goes further. We need to proactively cultivate health. I hope you'll definitely check out the whole health plan. But the same with peace. We need to proactively create peace. And there are 4 factors which, when present, this could be in a corner of an American city, or it could be another corner of the world. When these 4 factors are present, there's a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. Number 1, greater economic opportunities for women. Number 2, greater educational opportunities for children. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, an amelioration of unnecessary human despair. When you have those, you'll have that higher incidence of peace. If all you do is have situations of that level of despair in people's lives and lack of opportunity, that lack of opportunity, that despair becomes a petri dish out of which all manner of personal and societal dysfunctions are almost inevitable, including ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. You can't just treat the symptoms. That's what status quo 20th century politics does. It just treats the symptoms. We need to move into root causes. And the traditional status quo politician doesn't want to look at the root causes because of how often their public policies are the root cause. The root cause is economic injustice. That is underneath so much of our societal dysfunction. It's underneath our mental health crisis. They don't want us to even look at how much economic anxiety, chronic economic anxiety, what it does to a person, to be constantly worried, what will happen if my kids get sick? What will happen if I lose this job? People who are jobs that they hate because it's the only way they can get benefits. What this does to you mentally, you need more than mental health care. You also need to cut out at the root all of those contributing factors to your despair. And so a Department of Peace is that which cultivates peace, cultivates a situation, whether it is in another part of the world or this part of the world, where we build peacekeeping forces. Just like we have a military academy, we should have a peace academy. I look at the military the way I look at a surgeon. If you have to have surgery, then of course you want to have the best surgeon. And the United States, if the United States has to have surgery, you better believe we should have the best surgeon, and we should have the best surgeon on hand. But a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery if possible. And of course, the United States should as well. Secondly, I want a Department of Children and Youth. America's children are at such risk. I've met elementary school principals who have told me they have elementary school students on suicide watch. In public schools all over this country, we have trauma rooms. Trauma rooms. At first, I remember years ago when everybody was talking about trauma-informed education. And I remember at first I thought, well, that's really cool, you know, trauma-informed education, because we'll really get down to what's happening in a child's life. But the more I got into it, the more I thought to myself, why should childhood be such a trauma for millions of American children? And once again, if we look at root causes, the level of poverty, the level of lack of opportunity, the level of lack of health care, all these things contribute so much to the fact that too many people are simply living on the edge. I think public policy should help people thrive. Now we have public policy after public policy after public policy that helps a few people thrive. We're not a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We're a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, and for a few of the people. And none of the people's children will remain safe. None of the people's children will thrive if we don't take care of this now and turn this thing around. That's why I want a Department of Children and Youth. And we have to think in terms of early childhood. We have to move beyond the standard education question, because I'm worried about a lot of children before they even go to school. Some of these kids are traumatized before preschool. 90% of a child's brain is formed in that first 5 years of life. And a pediatrician was talking to me the other day about how much goes on in the first year of life. We need to think in terms of nutrition in utero. We need to think about particularly Black mothers and infant mortality and maternal mortality. There are so many crises in this society that our current political system just doesn't even look at. They probably don't vote anyway. That's how corrupt this is. And when they tell us that we don't have things like universal health care, because it's so complicated. Again, it's not so complicated. It's just corrupt. There's one other issue before I close, and then I'm going to take your questions. We can talk about whatever you want. Cassie's going to monitor all that in the chat. It's time for us to end America's war on drugs. And I want to tell you why, and I want to tell you some of the ways I think it could be of value. President Richard Nixon started the war on drugs in 1971. He said that drugs were public enemy number one. There was a man who worked for his administration named John Ehrlichman. He was one of the men who went to prison for the Watergate scandal. And when he came out, he was known for he spilled the beans about all kinds of things. And one was the initiation of the war on drugs. He said Nixon knew that there was no public enemy number one, and he started it in large part as an attack on Black communities. We've spent almost $1 trillion. Clearly, it has not solved the drug problem. If it's anything, it's infinitely worse than it used to be. And now addiction is an ubiquitous problem in this country. We should not be treating it as a criminal issue. When I was in college, 300,000 people were imprisoned. Today, 2.3 million are imprisoned, and almost half of all federal drug offenders are non-violent. Almost half of all federal incarcerated people are non-violent drug offenders. So one big way to smash the prison industrial complex is to end the war on drugs, because millions of people, well, I don't know if it's millions, but definitely hundreds of thousands of nonviolent drug offenders in federal prisons today should be home with their kids. We should treat addiction not as a criminal issue. We should treat it as a health issue, as countries like Portugal do. And then the $100 billion that we spend on the drug war every year, for a fraction of that, we could have a world-class network of recovery options. They often say that presidents have drug czars. I don't want a drug czar. I want a recovery czar. I don't want to just fight drugs. I want to promote recovery. And another value to this for us will be undercutting the drug cartels, because so many of the people who are desperately trying to get into the United States at the southern border are doing so because they're seeking to escape the violence of the drug cartels. By us ending the drug war, we will cut out their black market. It won't completely fix it, but it will definitely put a dent in the problem. As long as we're talking about Latin America and the southern border, this is one of the areas where I do want to help America look in the mirror. Much of the economic destabilization is because of our own policies. And that includes things that are happening now, such as our sanctions in Venezuela, our sanctions on Cuba. You know, a lot of times, I don't think the average American even realizes that what these sanctions do to people's lives. They're meant to get the bad guys, but the bad guys, they have, you know, their bank accounts in Switzerland and stuff like that. We found out that at the end of the Ukraine war, when they put all these sanctions on Russian oligarchs, and they're like, they got so much going on in other parts of the world. They know how to hide their money. They know what to do. It's the average people who are hurt by these things. So what irony is this, that our sanctions on Cuba and our sanctions on Venezuela are actually helping to create the situations that then create thousands and thousands and thousands of people from Cuba and Venezuela who are at our southern border, which, by the way, should be a very different situation than it is. And if you give me the job, it will be. People who are so traumatized that they're willing to walk across the Darien Gap with their little children, 1,500 of whom were drowned in the Rio Grande River last year alone, 800 already this year. I went to Eagle Pass, Texas several weeks ago. I saw the concertina wire. I saw the buoys that make people drown. So we can talk about more of that if you want, if you put it in the chat, but there is no reason for the way we are undercutting our own most sacred principles when it comes to what is happening in the southern border. Like I said, I'll take that on more specifically if you indicate in the chat that you're interested. So I think you can tell from what I'm saying is that I don't think we need somebody who's had decades of a career ensconced in the car that drove us into this ditch, and we are in a ditch. They would say only one of them should be trusted to lead you out of the ditch. That makes no sense to me. As I said, we don't need more car mechanics. The problem is we're on the wrong road. As Franklin Roosevelt said, the primary job of the presidency is not administrative. He said it's moral leadership. We don't just need another technocrat. We need a visionary. And I'm not the greatest visionary in the United States, but I am the only one that's running for the Democratic nomination for president. And so I'm very grateful to all of you for giving me this opportunity to tell you a little bit about who I am, how I see the world, how I see this country, and what I would do over the next 4 years if you give me this job. I am not saying that I could turn this car around in 4 years. What I am saying is I think I could get us around the curve. And that would be a really big deal. We'd be facing another direction. Then it would be time to hand it over to another generation. And they can take it from here. So when I said before that I'm running because the fascists are at the door, we're going to win in 2024 by offering people so much more. If we just say, be afraid, be very afraid, that's not going to work this time. And if we say, let's just finish the job, Bidenomics, only 20% of Americans can honestly say they have a visceral experience that it's been of much help. We need to declare a climate emergency. We need to make a mass mobilization for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, creating in the meantime millions of jobs. We need to make a just transition from a war economy to a peace economy. And by the way, the return on investments in peace, education, healthcare, et cetera, are far greater than the ROI on just waging war. Things would start to change. And there's one other thing I want to say about that. In order for us to have a new beginning, in order for us to have a season of repair in this country, it's going to take all of us. I'm not asking you to send me to Washington to fight for you, because that's not what's going to fix this. I want to go to Washington to co-create with you a new chapter of American history. You, as well as I, have to go through some characterological changes in order to rise to the occasion. No one person can do it. No 100 people can do it. It's going to take all of us. Because to be honest, all of us in a certain way let it get this bad. It should never have gotten this bad that we're actually worried about fascists. And so each of us has to find that place within ourselves where we see political involvement as simply a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. I think that's how the whole thing was meant to be. And in all the various ways that it swerved, let's put it back on track. Other generations have done that, and we can too. Martin Luther King said that we need to have external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts in our soul. He also said that the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement, he said, was the desegregation of the American South. But he said the ultimate goal was the establishment of the beloved community. Enough of us know now that in order to have the personal lives that we want, we're going to have to find that love within ourselves. And we're going to have to the best of our ability, stand in integrity and stand in goodness and stand in compassion and stand in forgiveness. All that politics is our collective identity. And just as we have to practice certain principles and do our best to be the people we know in our hearts we should be in order to have a life that works, we have to collectively be the best that we can be too. Public policy should not just reflect institutionalized greed. Public policy should respect goodness. Not just that we're run like a business, but we're run like a family. We put our children first. We put our collective home, the earth itself, first. For those who say that stuff I'm saying is so naive, this is what I say. What's naive is to think that our democracy or even our species will necessarily last for another 100 years if we don't at least try. And if you elect me for this position, I promise you, I think we'll more than try. I think we'll get some things done. So thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity to give you the sort of broad overview of how I see my campaign positions and what I would do with the job of president. I'm going to turn it back over to Cassie, and I think that Cassie has some things to say as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Granger. I see so many incredible questions coming in, and we will be answering those right after Mark.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Granger, and I find myself quite moved by the words that were just shared by Marianne. I find myself even sad and in my heart. You know, she talked about crisis, and she talked about where our country is at, and she is so eloquent at being able to lead what she lives. And I think that is what is missing in the America that I know and love. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about what you can do to participate in this movement of Win with Williamson. You know, there is energy in this campaign, and it is building momentum. And it's going to require, like Marianne said, all of us. And so I want to ask you, what is your relationship to America? And what is the crisis that you feel that we're facing? You know, it's important that you come from a new place within yourself. She talked about this consciousness, and I think it's important that we step into who you're called to be as an American citizen. And as Marianne said, to be able to see that political involvement is the course of living a really amazing and fulfilling life. So we're going to have two things we're going to ask of you today, and I'll get to those in just a minute. You're going to see a link come through where you can donate from your heart today. And we're going to ask that you give. We're going to ask that you donate some money, because this movement takes money. We've got to be able to get on the ballot. We've got to have ballot access. We're getting ready to go to New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina, and the rallies are going to start picking up momentum. You can feel the momentum shifting and the momentum building. And so I want to ask you to be an advocate for America and a disciple for democracy, and to give a little bit more than what your mind may tell you is reasonable, but what your heart says is correct. You know, we just got done having Thanksgiving, and if you have a family of 4 that you created a Thanksgiving meal for, that was probably close to $250 spent on that meal. Could you also give that to the Marianne campaign? You can give an access all the way up to $6,600. And if you have the means to do that, we're going to ask you to dig deep and give what you can give today, to give the maximum, to give 6,600, to give 3,300, to give 1,500, to give a little bit more. That's the first ask. The second ask is I would like for you to think of right now the person in your life that is frustrated with American politics. Is it your mom or your spouse or your neighbor, your sister, your brother, your child, your parent? Go ahead and type into the chat who that person is, just the first name. Who's the person you're thinking of right now that needs to hear this message? And we're going to ask that you share this message, the recording that will be coming out on this, share it with 2 people, send them to marianne2024.com and have a conversation with them, to go beyond just sending an email or just asking them, but to being involved and taking on a role of being a part of this movement. The chat is going to go ahead. We're going to drop the link into the chat. When you drop that link into the chat, it's going to take you over to a page, and that page looks just like this, okay? When you're here, you have the ability to choose your commitment level, your donation. You can fill it out. It's all tracked right there, and we ask that you go there now and drive your friends and families there to help us win with Williamson. And then also take the time to really find your heart and be a part of a movement that's going to make a difference in this planet. I know, Marianne, as you spoke, I found myself emotional. And you painted a picture of truth that sometimes isn't comfortable to hear. And I know it can be difficult in our own lives to speak truth in our relationships and to look in the mirror and be honest. But it's time for all of us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what have we done to advocate for democracy? Because democracy is at crisis right now. And in so many ways, Marianne articulated that in no other way than anyone else can. Who else is speaking this kind of light into the darkness? If you're feeling her, if you recognize that she is this beacon of light that we can get behind, we're going to ask that you donate and you spread the word and you start being a part of the politics that's going to change America back to the thing that we all love, that dream that exists. So we're going to bring Marianne back to answer some of your questions. Hit that button. Once you've donated, let us know, because we like to celebrate that. So you're going to see the button right there that's going to take you to the link. Once you've donated, come back, let us know that you've donated. We're going to celebrate you, and we're going to celebrate that you're a part of this movement that's going to make a difference in the future and the lives of millions. Thank you, Marianne, for standing strong. And thank you for having the courage to take time out of your life that you could be doing something way different, to take a stand for truth when other people aren't. And I'm going to leave it with this. In 50 weeks, Marianne Williamson will be the Democratic nomination for president, and you will be walking into the ballot, and millions of people will be talking about her as the next president. And we will all be ignoring the naysayers, and we will be going in knowing that something is about to change, that America's ideals are real, and that someone like Marianne can be elected. It's time to bring in someone who's going to make a difference. And that's my call to action for all of you today. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Mark, so much.
Thank you, Mark. So appreciate it. And thank you again, Marianne, and to everyone who's adding their questions in the chat. We have been watching this all unfold and collecting them to bring them to Marianne. And Marianne, I just want to thank you. I think that for me, so many of us have felt gaslit by the system. And what I've seen in the chat that's resonating is how amazing it is to have a presidential candidate actually name what's happening in our lives. It's so rare. We know it, but we rarely hear it from a leader. And the fact that you are going to address things at the root cause, not just try to tinker with the externals, is so important. And go ahead.
Cassie, everywhere I go, practically I end up saying to the audience, I'm not saying anything you don't already know. Mm-hmm. And it's so true. I mean, maybe I mentioned a statistic here or there that somebody didn't know this specific statistic, but in terms of the landscape of our country and what's going on, everybody knows what I'm talking about. But that's the problem right there. There's almost a conspiracy among the political class not to talk about what's really happening. And if you don't talk about what's really happening, nobody's called to task to change what's really happening. And so everybody, these culture war things are created to distract people, right, from the root of their own misery. So people on the right think it's the people who are on the left who are the problem, or people on the left think people on the right are the problem. What's really the real polarity in American politics is between the powerful and the powerless, between those who have access to capital and access to more versus those who are just struggling to get by. That's why you see something like the UAW picket line. There were a bunch of Trump people on that, as well as people that you would not have associated with Trump, because people are realizing on both right and left now that the forces that are messing with you are the same no matter what your politics are. And it has so much to do with economics. Another thing, the majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. So much of what I've talked about, a lot of people would say, oh, she's far to the left. Well, actually, everything I'm talking about here today is considered a moderate position in every other advanced democracy. If our country was sane about these things, I would be considered a centrist, because these things are just like, so my kids don't get sick, so my kids can eat. Why should that be asking so much in the richest country in the world? But we've been trained to ask for too little. We've been trained to expect too little. And Americans have been trained to limit their political imagination. So it's true what you were saying, Cassie. I read an article about myself years ago that said Marianne Williamson isn't saying anything everybody else isn't saying. She's just saying it when the microphone is on. And I feel the same way now. I'm saying the same thing everybody else is saying, but to get the traditional politician to bring it up in a way that actually is enough to create political change, something we haven't been used to in the American presidency for a while. And that's what we need now, I think.
Absolutely. And it's not, for me, it's not just the fact that you're addressing these issues that we're talking about behind the scenes, but your vision for America is so powerful. And so I want to get to some of these questions that people are asking, and so many of them are about your vision. So Paul asks, how will raising the minimum wage and distributing more income to people affect our economy? Wouldn't this be like another stimulus check?
Well, first of all, a stimulus check stimulated the economy. That's why it was called a stimulus check. So yeah, so the more people have, the more people buy. Hello. If I have the money to buy things, I buy things, and then that stimulates the economy. And also, if people are not living in survival mode, they are able to work at jobs that they like, that they don't just have to be in because of the healthcare, et cetera. Let people have some, somebody said it to me, the way one woman put it to me a few months ago, she said, there's no wiggle room. There's no wiggle room. And I thought that was so, it's like the majority of Americans live in a situation where there's no wiggle room. We had over 3 million evictions last year. That was like at the highest of the housing crisis. People miss one rent check and they have to decide between their rent and their insulin. So of course, anything that helps people thrive stimulates the economy. Because when I'm not in survival mode, I can express my own creativity, my own productivity. I can do things I want to do. I can find my own brilliance. And that's very much a stimulant on the economy as well as the life of an individual.
So true. Tracy asks, how do we get free schooling and tech school? Do we redirect where our money from taxes is going?
Well, all of this, of course, has to do with how the money, taxes are what builds the U.S. Treasury. And so absolutely, it is the decision of Congress, how are you going to spend that money? It's very important to realize we had tuition-free college and tech school until the 1970s. We had a system at University of Texas, where I grew up, University of California, University of Florida. Back in the 70s, back in the 60s, it was not expensive to get a high-quality college education. So this kind of vulture capitalism, unfettered capitalism that has become so the norm, this kind of malfunctional strain of capitalism. Remember, I didn't say dysfunctional, I said malfunctional. If a plane crashes because the engines died, that was an engine malfunction. That wasn't an engine dysfunction. This is a malfunction, that this kind of predatory behavior is is thrown onto America's young, turning the desire of American young people to get an education so they can be all they can be. And that, by the way, builds the US economy, to turn that into a profit center. That's just, it's so unjust. It's so immoral. But the point is, it was unnecessary. Now, you, like I've mentioned several times here, other advanced democracies have this. I want to tell you how they do it in Australia, okay? In Australia and Germany and all kinds of countries, you have the education as high as you can go. You get your BA, get your master's, law school, PhD, whatever it is. And then what they do in Australia is, you know, the government can tell from your taxes how much money you're making. So when you get to the point that money could start be taken out to pay back the government because you're at a comfortable enough rate that it would not be deleteriously impacting your life, you know, your lifestyle, the government starts paying itself back. Ta-ta. You know, but it's done according to what you can, you know, there's a gauging. It's not going to be something that would force you to go get a job that you hate. Because that's what we have now. We have people, and I've met so many of them. They take out tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. We know that, in college loans. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in my 20s, carrying tens of thousands of loan debt. I can't even imagine. And then we don't understand where people's anxiety comes from. Anyway, so you have people who come out of school, they have all this huge debt. And then they do the math. And they say, well, if I go get a job in the field that I just got a degree for, I can't imagine paying back this debt until I'm like 55. So they end up saying, some of them, so I'm going to have to go work somewhere else because I want to get rid of this college loan debt. So what did I even take it out for? We should be promoting, this is the thing, we should be setting all of our citizens up to thrive. But young people, particularly, we should be setting young people up to succeed. And in too many ways, we're setting them up to fail. So yes, we had it before, and we could have it again. Higher education has become just another multi-billion-dollar industry. And you put that together with banks and some of the overreach there, and you get what we got. Many people believe that with the Higher Education Act, the president could, and I certainly will try my best to eradicate that entire debt.
I know that would be an incredible relief to so many people.
Millions, tens of millions of people.
Life-changing. There were lots of questions about your plans for ending the war on drugs, and you touched on that some, and I would love to hear more about that. Julie specifically asked, well, that's actually a different question. We'll stick with the war on drugs for now.
What was it specifically you want to know?
What are your plans for ending the war on drugs? Well,
first you decriminalize. And then you take, but it has to be partnered with harm reduction. You know what happened in Oregon? They voted to decriminalize, 3 years later to recriminalize, because it wasn't partnered with the kind of harm reduction projects that were necessary. It doesn't. Our criminalizing these things just creates this black market, which creates the drug cartels, which creates the problem, the violence, which creates the problem at the border, which helps create the prison industrial complex. What we're doing is not working. So let's start with decriminalization. First of all, I want to deschedule marijuana from, like, I could do that my first week in office, deschedule that from the Schedule I drug. Also let out everybody in the US prison system who's there for marijuana. By the way, you have, you know, I would only have power within the federal prison system. Remember when I said earlier that everybody has to now become more politically active? Please remember that means I can work on certain things in Washington. You have to work on them in your states and on your local level. So when it comes to your state prison system, a lot of this has to do with the state, right? So all of us have to be active in all of this. But we can let all people who are in prison, certainly on the federal level, I would have that power for marijuana charges, and also expunge those records, because those people should never have been there. Should never have been there. And that, by the way, if we start decriminalizing and we start on that path to legalization, we will have more bandwidth and more resources to put into the fentanyl crisis, which is one that we need to be seriously attending to.
Yes, Julie asked, what is your idea on how to curb the fentanyl crisis?
Well, the first thing has to do, and it's interesting because what Trump had done, Trump had said to China, you bring that in our ports, and there are going to be such tariffs you wouldn't believe it. And so they said, okay, and they went with those base chemicals and traveling through Mexico. There does seem to be some success being had now. The Biden administration working with China, negotiating. I think they call it the base chemicals. Origin chemicals, something like that. It has to be pronged on every single possible level, having to do, first of all, with negotiation with China, and also that has to do with the ports. But fentanyl is not coming with people swimming over the Rio Grande. That's coming in the ports.
Danny asked for you to address reparations for slavery.
Okay, first of all, I come from a background of spiritual transformation. And at the highest level, spiritual transformation and psychological transformation are the same thing. They're a healing of the mind, a change in the way we use our minds and align our minds with our hearts. And there is a principle of atonement. In Catholicism, people go to confession. And in Judaism, there's the Day of Atonement is the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. In AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, you must admit the exact nature of your wrongs. So whether you're a nation or you are an individual, you cannot have the future you want if you will not clean up the past, make an effort to clean up the past. Now, I think the average American might not fully realize all the history here, and there are certain forces in this country that don't want them to. But if you have the first slave ships coming over in 1619, and then the slave trade revving up, the cotton trade revving up in the early 1800s, and you don't have the Civil War even begin until 1861, we're talking about almost 250 years of abject slavery. When the Civil War was over, historians believe there were anywhere between 4 and 5 million enslaved people. So I think everybody here realizes we're talking about such abject slavery for centuries. And then that was followed. First of all, it's worth noting that Tecumseh Sherman promised, General Tecumseh Sherman promised that there would be to every formerly enslaved family of 4 that they would receive 40 acres and a mule, which would, think about it. I mean, you're told you're no longer enslaved, but where are you supposed to go and what are you supposed to do? So 40 acres and a mule was really a big deal. Most of them were not given that, and even those who were given it, usually it was given back. So you follow the end of the Civil War, except for 12 years of Reconstruction, you had basically 100 years, from 1865 to 1965, the Civil Rights Movement, of further institutionalized oppression of Black people in the American South in the form of segregation, the Jim Crow laws, etc. Lyndon Johnson and Martin Luther King, because of King, of course, and then Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And I think that if Martin Luther King had lived, if either Johnson or even Humphrey had been president continuing, I think they would have gotten to economic remuneration next. Germany paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations at the end of World War II in reparations for the Holocaust. By the middle of the 20th century, reparations was simply a civilized concept that where one people had been wronged by another, that there would be economic remuneration. It shouldn't be considered that outlandish an idea. So my idea is for a reparations council of Black elders, and it would have to be intergenerational because the money, I think, should be dispersed over 20 years. Black leaders in culture, art, politics, business, education, and so forth. And they would decide within the construct of educational renewal and economic renewal. If I owe you $1,000, I don't think I get to tell you how to spend it. If that council thinks in terms of individuals, or if they think in terms of colleges, or think in terms of real estate, it wouldn't be up for white America to decide. once this council was determined, and it was within those categories of educational economic renewal. And I believe $1 trillion makes sense. I think also when people hear $1 trillion, please remember that our current defense budget is $858 billion, which is obviously bloated and ridiculously high. That's almost $1 trillion a year. And this would be $1 trillion. But the numbers, hey, a negotiation is a negotiation. I could see $1 trillion. And also, if the wage gap between Black and white Americans was closed, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. I just think, if you look at Germany and the Jews, I mean, certainly goes without saying that global anti-Semitism is back, however, in a big way. Not that it was ever completely gone, unfortunately. However, when you look at the healing between Germany and the Jews of Eastern Europe that is related to the Holocaust, they did their full-on mea culpa, including reparations. And I believe that we would be giving a great gift. And that war was over in 1945. We're talking about 1865, and we're still carrying this very toxic baton and passing it on generation to generation. I think it would be a great gift to our children to do something in our time that literally made a difference and in a fundamental way made a difference.
Absolutely. Root cause healing. Nicole asks, how would you create a living wage for everyone?
Well, it's called a minimum. So right now we have $7.25. President Biden, when he ran, had promised $15 an hour. When he got into office, he did get $15 an hour put in for all federal workers, which he could unilaterally do. Then he tried to get it in the COVID relief bill that it would be $15 an hour across the board. And he was stopped by the parliamentarian. But it's worth noting here that the parliamentarian has no actual political power. I assure you, no Republican president lets himself be stopped by the parliamentarian. And when a parliamentarian tried to stop George Bush, he just fired the parliamentarian. So yes, the parliamentarian stopped him, but the President Biden did not need to allow himself to be stopped by the parliamentarian. In every major city in the United States, a living wage is over $20 an hour. So when you say a living wage, what you do is you gauge it with what that area of the country is. In one area of the country, the living wage would be much less than in another area of the country. So it would be gauged. And in places where it really is too hard for businesses to make the change, ultimately it will be good for the businesses because there will be a greater buying power among the people who live in that town. But if that's too much of a shock on that business system immediately, then it makes sense that businesses could apply and the government would give some compensation for that, let's say over a period of 5 years.
Could you talk about your actions to support animal rights and to end factory farming and testing on animals?
Animal factory farming is evil. It's terrible, the cruelty to animals that is still allowed in this country. And also something that really upsets me about it is that we've begun to criminalize protest. I mean, there are people who could go to jail who are protesting animal cruelty, but the animal cruelty is being perpetrated by people who had criminally transgressed against laws of protection which were there. So I think animal cruelty and the animal factory farming, years ago, I was part of a faith council, advisory council for, what is that organization? Humane Society, is that what it was? And it had to do with cockfighting. It had to do with puppy mills. I think that on both the left and the right, there's a real, Americans are decent people. This is one of the things that I've really found, Cassie, running for office. The American people are not the problem. We are decent people. The problem is this sclerotic political system that sits on top of the expression of the will of the people, which is why we need a revolution in the ballot box. The only way to supersede the way that all this money, corporate short-term profit maximization, supersedes the health and well-being of people and animals is through that revolution at the ballot box. If you go to Marianne2024.com and you look at the list of issues, animal protections are definitely on there. There's specifics that we need to do.
Very good. Angus asked, could Marianne talk a bit about her foreign policy ideas?
Well, I already talked about a Department of Peace. The United States has to become more humble in our foreign policy. We are no longer the sole superpower. It is no longer a unipolar world. It is now a multipolar world. We are one of several. There's China, there's Brazil, there's India, there's Russia. We're not the only one out there. And so many of the problems that we are facing right now, Israel and Gaza is an example, Ukraine is an example, cannot be solved just because America decides how it's going to be. We need to build a whole new level of international consortium. I believe that, one of the reasons, Cassie, why I love talking at colleges is because Gen Z people weren't even born in the 20th century. Even if they were sort of just hanging out there as small children for a while. There's a different mindset in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, there is, I believe, an organic unfoldment of people who recognize that new levels of interaction, a kind of internationalism, is so necessary. When I was a child, you didn't see movies from all over the world. You didn't hear music from all over the world. If you walk down the street in New York and Houston, Chicago, you see people from all over the world. This is like a microcosm of what the world could be. And America has taken this sort of toxic cowboy stance, imperialistic in some ways, and that needs to stop. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't ever think that military action is necessary or demanded, but it should not be done. Certainly, Iraq war should not have happened. The Vietnam War should not have happened. The last 20 years in Afghanistan should not have happened. We need in Israel, of course, what's happening in Gaza now. There is a ceasefire at the moment having to do with the release of these hostages, and thank God that there is, but we want more than 4 days, obviously. But we need a ceasefire. We need a release of all the hostages, and we need a plan for a two-state solution. And this will take international involvement on a level that has not been present in that situation before. I would be an American president who did not apologize for American power, but at the same time, use it from a humble place, celebrating and taking a strong stand for Western liberalism, as in big L liberalism and freedom, but knowing that we are just one nation among many, carrying our power very responsibly and wisely, but humbly.
Dot asks, how will you get Democrats and Republicans to cooperate and not just block every idea?
I don't care who you are, whether you're, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, Joe Biden, or me. You're hoping, I hope the House is my party. I hope the Senate is my party. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. 1 4-year term, you have two terms when it's determined, who's in the House and who's in the Senate. And if there are those who would obstruct you, look how much the president was obstructed by 2 people in his own party, Senators Manchin and Sinema. So you do the best you can, but I tell you, it's ridiculous to think that because Biden had all this time in the Senate that he could get certain things done. If those senators want to block you, they'll block you. If they've known you for 20 years or they've known you for 2 years. My hope would be that progressives in the House and the Senate and we've all got to come out of our silos right now. I think this is such an important thing. Enough with who's black, who's brown, who's white, who's Jewish, who's Christian, who's Muslim, who's gay, who's straight, who's non-binary, who's trans. All those things are important. This is not to minimize those things. But in alchemy, there's this term separatio, that the individual identities are sorted out to become perfected and then come together at a higher level. So you now have, for instance, Josh Hawley, who is one of the most conservative senators who just called for the repeal of Citizens United. So we're living in a time you don't know where you're going to find your friends and where you're going to find your obstruction. But I would be trying my best to make a moral case to the American people. And then a lot of this would be up to the American people to make sure with your votes and with your lobbying that your congressmen and your senators know that you want them to support this or that. I would still have the power of the executive order. I would still have the power to appoint the leaders of these agencies, which have now been captured by corporate forces, and I would have the power of the bully pulpit. I would be as honest and authentic and laying it down the way I really see it with you as a president as I am as a candidate.
Thank you, Marianne. I can tell from the chat that you have just been resonating with people the way you always have. And it's so meaningful to have someone standing up and speaking to the issues that are deepest to our hearts and truly having a vision for transforming this at the root. It's everything. Would you give us your final closing thoughts?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. Thank you to Cassie. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to Gina. Thank you to Carlos. Thank you to Lauren. Thank you to all the people who work so tirelessly and do such wonderful things for this campaign. I'm very proud of this campaign, despite all kinds of blocks, including media, for reasons that there's a political media industrial complex, and it thinks it has the right to determine who your options should be. But when people see this campaign and the message that we're putting out, people are thinking very deeply today what it would actually take to win in 2024. And I believe that this is the winning message, offering people something that will be a win for them in their lives, a better future, a future to live into, not just be scared, be very scared of what was, but to be very inspired by what could be. Just like sometimes we imagine, people say, imagine the life you want. Imagine the country you want. Imagine a country in which no child is hungry. Imagine a country in which everybody can live at one job, a dignified, decent life, have time for their family, time for their kids. Imagine a country where every school is a palace of culture and learning and the arts and safe and happy children. Imagine a country in which people can go as high in their achievement as they possibly can, and that they're not only inspired to do that, but supported in doing that. And imagine a world without war. We have probably a 20-year period of repair that's necessary. And for those of you who are young, this is probably a generational thing for you. But it's time for this generation to show up and to rise up, as our ancestors did. We don't want to be the generation on whose watch this thing goes down. And it doesn't have to. But we have to get busy. And I believe that this campaign offers a possibility. But we have to move, and we have to move quickly. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to get on the ballot in all 50 states. And that right there should tell you everything. That's how rigged the system is. That only people either with a lot of money or access to a lot of money even have a shot at the pinnacles of power. And that's why we don't have policies to serve the people, because in too many cases, the people aren't the one making the policies. This can only change if we change it. We need a revolution at the ballot box. And if you are already someone who has a yes in your heart about this campaign, I hope you will give more money. I hope you'll give more time. I hope, if it's comfortable for you and you can, obviously. Tell your friends. Go to the website, see the things that you can do, post online. And if you haven't, I respect the first primary. There will be New Hampshire, January 23rd. Then right after that, there will be South Carolina. There will be Nevada and all of these. I respect that some of you might still be thinking like who you're voting for. I honor that. But if you even think that this campaign deserves in the mix, I hope you will support us. I hope you will support us with your dollars, with your time, with your TikToks, with your Facebook postings, with your Instagram. I hope you will match our level of commitment. I have a really wonderful, wonderful campaign, but we need to scale up. And, We have wonderful volunteers, and I invite you to be one. We can create something truly beautiful here. Good, true, and beautiful. With your help, we will. And I promise you, if you give this job to me, I will give it all of my heart, all of my soul. And I believe we could do something wonderful for our country. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for all the donations that have been coming in. And please tell your friends, please follow that link and make a donation if you're comfortable. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.